You know the feeling I am about to describe because you have experienced it countless times, though you may never have named it. It arrives in moments of stillness, perhaps late at night when sleep eludes you, or during a solitary walk, or in the middle of what should be a triumphant achievement. Suddenly, inexplicably, you feel it, the unsettling sense that you are going through the motions of a life without actually living it, that despite your activity and accomplishments, something essential is missing, that you are somehow not quite real, not quite present, not quite yourself. You quickly dismiss this feeling. You attribute it to tiredness or melancholy or the weather. You return to your projects with renewed vigor, as if frantic activity could silence the quiet voice suggesting that everything you are doing serves merely to avoid confronting what you actually are. But the feeling returns. It always returns, because it is not pathology but recognition, the first dim awareness that you have been asleep, that what you call your life is something you have never truly inhabited. I am writing to tell you that this feeling is not your enemy, but your ally. It is truth knocking at the door. The question is, will you answer? You move, you think, you pursue your ambitions with what appears to be conscious intent, yet you remain fundamentally asleep, a marionette animated by forces you neither chose nor understand. Let me describe a man I observed for 2 decades in Hamburg, my father's business associate, a merchant of considerable wealth and reputation. Each morning he rose before dawn, conducted his affairs with apparent purpose, accumulated wealth, married, fathered children, attended church, paid his debts. By every social measure, he lived successfully. Yet I tell you with certainty, he never lived at all. How can I make such a claim? Because I watched him at his deathbed, age 53, and saw on his face not merely physical pain, but something far more terrible, the dawning recognition that he had spent every one of those 53 years animating a puppet he mistook for himself. Not once had he questioned whether the merchant conducting those transactions was actually him, whether the voice in his head claiming ownership of all those thoughts was anything more than an echo in an empty room. You believe yourself awake because you are conscious. This is your first and most catastrophic error. Consciousness of thoughts is not the same as consciousness of reality. The dream walker is conscious of his dream world. This does not mean he is awake. You, too, dream, but your dream unfolds with eyes open in the marketplace and the dining hall, and you mistake this waking dream for genuine life. What is this false self you defend so desperately? Your name, your biography, your personality, these constitute what I call the empirical self. And this empirical self is nothing but a temporary configuration of the will, as fleeting as a wave upon the ocean's surface. The wave believes itself separate, unique, destined for particular shores. Yet it is merely ocean temporarily formed by wind and current, returning inevitably to its source. Your real life cannot begin until you recognize you have never actually lived. Now that I have disturbed your comfortable certainty, let us examine with surgical precision exactly what this self is that you have been defending all these years. The empirical self, this personality you call yourself, consists of several components, not one of which you actually chose. Your temperament, inherited from parents you did not select, manifesting through a body you did not design. Your early conditioning, absorbed unconsciously before you possessed any capacity for critical examination. Your accumulated memories, selectively edited by mechanisms you do not control, arranged into a coherent narrative that is largely fiction. Your current desires and aversions, arising unbidden from depths you neither understand nor govern. Consider this evidence carefully. Where is this precious self during dreamless sleep? All personality, all concerns, all identity vanished completely. What returns in the morning is not the same consciousness, but a reconstruction based on memory, like a building demolished nightly and rebuilt each dawn from the same blueprints. You die and are reborn daily, never noticing the discontinuity. I observed a woman in Weimar who devoted 40 years to cultivating what she called herself: refinement in music, grace in conversation, perfection in needlework. Then illness confined her to bed for months. Unable to perform her practiced roles, unable to present her carefully constructed identity to society, something extraordinary happened. The edifice crumbled. She emerged transformed, saying to me, "I spent 40 years building something that never existed." The relief is unspeakable. Here is a simple test you can perform. Become absorbed in contemplating the Rhine's flow, or lose yourself entirely in a Mozart symphony. Notice how you disappear completely during these moments. There is only seeing without seer, hearing without hearer. When your identity returns, and it will return, for the will is not easily denied, recognize that this returning identity is optional overlay, not fundamental reality. The empirical self is a costume, not your face, a role you play, not the actor. Understanding this distinction liberates you from the exhausting project of defending and perfecting something that was always illusory. Having shown you that the empirical self is illusory, I must now reveal what actually drives your actions. What I call the will, that blind, unconscious force that animates all existence. You believe yourself to be making choices. This is the ego's most cherished delusion. I ask you, did you choose your parents, your native language, your fundamental temperament, whether you wake each morning with optimism or melancholy? You did not. Yet these given shape every subsequent decision you make. You are born into circumstances you did not select, driven by desires you did not choose to have, toward goals that seem to arise from your own autonomous deliberation, but are actually predetermined by factors entirely beyond your control. I once observed two Berlin professors competing viciously for the same academic chair. Each believed his ambition to be his own, righteously justified by his superior qualifications. But I saw what they could not: the will to live driving them both. Neither chose his competitive nature any more than the lion chooses to hunt. They were hunted by their own unchosen hunger for recognition. Consider any desire you experience right now. Did you choose to desire this? Could you, by pure act of will, desire its opposite instead? You cannot. Desires arise from depths you do not access or control. What you call your will is merely the universal will manifesting through this particular bodily configuration, temporary, determined, mechanical. This recognition brings profound relief. You need not defend choices you never actually made. You need not torture yourself over past decisions, for those decisions were as inevitable as water flowing downhill. You are not responsible for being who you are. Your character was given, not chosen, but you are responsible for recognizing what you are. The puppet that discovers its strings need not become paralyzed. It can work with the strings rather than against them, flowing with the will rather than exhausting itself in the futile attempt to assert autonomous control that was always illusory. You must now grasp the most important philosophical distinction. Reality divides into two aspects. There is the world as representation, how it appears to your consciousness, governed by space, time, and causality. And there is the world as will the thing in itself, the blind striving beneath all appearances. You experience yourself in both ways simultaneously, though you rarely notice this. You know your body as object among objects. You see your hand in space, observe it moving through time according to causal laws. But you also experience your body from within, as the willing that animates it. When you lift your arm, you do not experience causality from outside, but the will's immediate manifestation from inside. This unique dual access to both the phenomenal appearance and the noumenal reality provides the key to metaphysics that eluded even Kant. I discovered this walking along the Elbe in Dresden one autumn morning, the river flowing, Arthur observing suddenly These appeared not as two separate things, but as twin manifestations of a single underlying reality. The subject-object division revealed itself as a framework structuring representation, not as ultimate truth. That moment's clarity never entirely left me. Philosophy ceased being abstract speculation and became lived recognition. Within the world of representation, causality operates reliably. Scientific laws govern. Individual separation is functionally real. You cannot walk through walls or telepathically communicate with distant minds. Respect representation's rules, but recognize their limited jurisdiction. They apply within the phenomenal realm. They cannot touch the thing in itself. The will, by contrast, exists beyond space, time, and causality. It is blind, possessing no consciousness of its own. It is aimless, driven by no purpose beyond its own continuation. It is insatiable, for satisfaction would mean cessation of striving, and the will is nothing but striving itself. This is not pessimistic interpretation, but clear-eyed observation of existence's fundamental nature. When you suffer over life's meaninglessness or death's inevitability, you are applying representational thinking to the wrong domain. These are not problems requiring practical solutions, but metaphysical confusions requiring deeper recognition. Learn to distinguish which domain your difficulty belongs to, and you will save yourself immeasurable wasted effort. The principle of sufficient reason, this is the technical name for the framework structuring all your experience. It operates in 4 domains: physical causality, every event has a cause; logical necessity, every conclusion requires premises; spatial temporal relations, objects occupy positions in space and time; and motivation, every action follows from desire. This principle makes experience possible. It also creates your prison. Through space and time, the principle creates individuation, the appearance that you are separate from all other beings. 2 objects cannot occupy the same space simultaneously. 2 events cannot occur at the same instant, in the same location. Thus arises the illusion of multiplicity. Billions of separate beings competing for limited resources, defending their boundaries, experiencing themselves as fundamentally alone. I once counseled a Frankfurt banker, suffering existential despair despite worldly success. He asked the wrong questions. What caused existence? What is life's ultimate purpose? These questions have no answers, because causality and teleology operate only within representation, not at reality's ground. His despair stemmed not from the world's nature, but from his category mistake applying phenomenal categories to noumenal reality. Understanding this distinction brought immediate relief, not through providing answers, but through revealing that certain questions dissolve under proper analysis. The ancient Hindu concept of Maya illusion refers precisely to this: the phenomenal world's deceptive appearance of ultimate reality. Multiplicity is Maya. Unity is truth. This does not mean individual objects don't exist within representation. They do, and we must respect their reality at that level. But this existence is not fundamental. Within daily life, honor space, time, and causality completely. Do not eat, and you will starve, regardless of metaphysical insights. But when isolation weighs upon you, when the sense of fundamental separation from all existence produces that peculiar suffering I call metaphysical loneliness, remember, the boundaries are arbitrary, the separation provisional. You are separate within representation. You are one at the level of will. Both truths coexist. Wisdom consists in recognizing which level applies to which concern. Now, I must tell you what you are at the deepest level. And this truth will transform everything if you can truly grasp it. You are not your name, your body, your personality, or your biography. You are the universal will temporarily expressing itself through this particular configuration of matter. Tattvamasi, ancient Sanskrit phrase from the Upanishads, which translates as, "That art thou." This is not poetic metaphor, but literal truth. The same force that drives a tiger to hunt, the tree to grow toward sunlight, the river to flow toward the sea, this identical force animates you. What you call your will is merely this universal will's temporary localized expression, no more belonging to you than the wave belongs to itself rather than to the ocean. I witnessed this truth during the Berlin cholera epidemic. A mother lost her child and told me months later, "At first I mourned only my son, but the grief expanded until I was mourning not just him, but all suffering existence. The boundary between my personal loss and the world's suffering dissolved. This made it simultaneously more bearable and more terrible. I recognized myself as everything that suffers. Consider what this means. Before your birth, where were you? In every flower that bloomed, every creature that lived and died, every star that burned in the void, the same will expressing endlessly. After this body's death, you will not vanish into nothingness, but return to this ubiquity. Not personal immortality, which would merely perpetuate the problem, but recognition that what you truly are never began and cannot end. Every being you encounter, the beggar on Frankfurt streets, the merchant in his counting house, the dog lying by the fire, even the insect you crush thoughtlessly is you wearing a different mask. The apparent multiplicity is phenomenal only. At the noumenal level, one will, infinite manifestations. When you harm another, you harm yourself. Not metaphorically, but literally. When you witness suffering, you witness your own suffering in different form. This recognition does not require believing comfortable falsehoods, but seeing through phenomenal appearance to underlying unity. Act from this recognition, and ethics transforms from external commandment, requiring effort, to natural expression of truth. Having established the philosophical foundation, we must now enter practical territory. Understanding that the self is illusory differs vastly from experiencing this truth directly. The bridge between conceptual knowledge and lived recognition is systematic self-observation. For 6 months, I maintained meticulous records of my daily states, moods, desires, thoughts, behaviors. The pattern that emerged was devastating to my ego, but liberating to whatever I truly am. Every spontaneous impulse had identifiable causes in prior events. Every free decision revealed itself as determined by circumstances and character traits I had not chosen. The autonomous Arthur I had imagined, free, rational, self-directing, was nowhere to be found. Only mechanical responses to external and internal stimuli. You must conduct this investigation yourself. Each evening, reconstruct your day's significant moments. For each decision or emotion, trace backward to its cause. What triggered this feeling? What circumstances led to that choice? You will discover an unbroken chain of causation with no room for the free will you imagine yourself to possess. Track how your mood varies with sleep quality, digestion, weather, time of day. Notice how your profound philosophical insights often correlate with good breakfast, your existential despair with poor digestion. This is not reductionism, but honest observation. The spiritual and physical are not separate domains, but twin aspects of the same underlying reality. Observe how you repeat the same mistakes, pursue the same futile goals, experience the same disappointments cyclically. If you possess genuine autonomy, you could simply stop these patterns. You cannot. The wheel turns mechanically, and what you call yourself is merely a passenger claiming to be the driver. This exercise is profoundly uncomfortable. You will be tempted to abandon it, to find reasons why it doesn't apply to you, to insist that your case is different. These resistances are themselves mechanical, the ego's predictable defense mechanisms against recognition of its own illusory nature. Persist despite discomfort. The truth revealed through systematic observation is worth every moment of wounded vanity. What emerges is not self-hatred, but clear seeing. You are not bad for being mechanical, you are human. And all humans are mechanical. This recognition is not failure, but progress toward truth. Eventually, if you practice honestly, a crisis arrives. The evidence that your cherished self is illusory becomes undeniable. Everything you built your life upon, your achievements, relationships, identity, suddenly appears as an elaborate structure constructed on sand. I counseled a Leipzig professor through such a crisis. His entire identity centered on his academic reputation. When a colleague publicly refuted his central theory, the foundation crumbled. He described it as drowning. Everything I thought I was dissolved. I grasped desperately for something solid and found nothing but void. This is what mystics call the dark night of the soul. It is not pathology, but necessary passage. Most turn back here, fleeing into renewed activity, new projects, new relationships, new ambitions, anything to avoid the groundlessness. They bury the dangerous insight beneath frantic doing, but this merely postpones the inevitable. The crack once formed never entirely heals. Those with courage to remain in the groundlessness discover something unexpected. You cannot fall from ground that never existed. The terror you anticipate, the catastrophic collapse you imagine, never actually arrives. The worst that happens is the death of an illusion you will not miss once it is gone. The crisis proceeds through stages. First, denial, frantically seeking evidence that previous certainties remain valid, that the ego's existence can be proven, that free will can be demonstrated. This stage exhausts itself naturally, the evidence against autonomous selfhood is simply too overwhelming. Second, despair, experiencing the groundlessness as terrifying void, as nihilistic abyss where nothing matters and all meaning dissolves. This feels like psychological death, and in truth it is the death of the fictional self that never actually existed. Third, if you do not flee, comes recognition, discovering that what seemed like void is actually spacious absence of false limitations. The Leipzig professor reported 3 months later, the nothing became openness. I am freer now than when I believed myself to be someone. What looked like disaster from within the ego reveals itself as liberation from beyond it. Do not flee this passage. Sit with the terror. Feel the groundlessness without trying to fix it. Discover empirically that you do not actually fall. Nothing catastrophic occurs. The anticipated disaster was your liberation all along. Between the dark night's crisis and ongoing transformation, you need positive access to truth, not merely knowing what you are not, but experiencing directly what remains when the false self dissolves. Art provides this crucial gateway. Standing before a Raphael Madonna in Dresden's gallery, I suddenly ceased being Arthur observing painting. Subject and object dissolved. There was only the seeing itself, no seer, no scene, no boundary between consciousness and its object. Time suspended. Space lost its separation. When I returned, seconds later, the world appeared somehow lighter, less solid, more transparent to the will. Beneath all appearances, in genuine aesthetic experience, losing yourself entirely in a magnificent sunset over the Rhine, a Mozart symphony in Frankfurt's concert hall, a sublime natural vista in the Alps, the subject-object division momentarily dissolves. For that instant, you are neither the experiencer nor the experienced, but pure experiencing itself. These glimpses reveal reality unmediated by the principle of sufficient reason, consciousness, without the distorting lens of self-interest. But most people never achieve true aesthetic contemplation. They evaluate rather than perceive, compare rather than simply see, relate everything back to personal interest. They stand before the painting thinking, is this worth what the museum paid? How does this compare to other Raphaels I have seen? What will I tell my friends about it? This is not aesthetic experience, but ego involvement masquerading as appreciation. True contemplation requires three conditions: temporary cessation of willing, complete absorption in perception, dissolution of the subject-object boundary. You cannot force this state, but you can invite it through patient receptivity. Visit a gallery this week. Before a painting, stand silently for 5 full minutes longer than feels comfortable. Do not think about the painting. Evaluate its merits or analyze its technique. Simply perceive. Let thoughts arise and pass without engagement. Notice the moment, however, brief, when you disappear and only seeing remains. This provides empirical evidence that self is optional, not inevitable. You have experienced egoless consciousness directly, not as theory, but as lived reality. This knowing cannot be argued away because you have verified it experientially. Philosophy becomes lived wisdom rather than intellectual speculation. Music most directly reveals the will itself, pure becoming without representation's mediation, emotion's immediate expression without conceptual overlay. This is why music moves us so profoundly, why even the unphilosophical feel something tremendous in a great symphony that they cannot articulate. They are encountering reality's inner nature directly before it crystallizes into individuated forms. Practice this weekly. The capacity deepens with repetition. We return now to daily life, but everything is changed. You continue working, negotiating, creating, yet without the desperate grasping that poisoned ordinary existence. I know a Frankfurt grain merchant who penetrated illusion's veil through repeated business failures. He now conducts transactions with remarkable clarity, no longer paralyzed by fear of loss or intoxicated by greed. His business has improved since he stopped caring personally about results. I do my work, he tells me, but the work is no longer mine. His competitors find this paradox baffling. How can indifference produce better results than ambition? The answer: ego investment produces paralysis. Fear of failure inhibits necessary risk-taking. Anxiety about outcomes clouds judgment. Emotional attachment to results generates poor decisions made from defensiveness rather than clarity. When these obstacles are removed through recognition that you, in the egoic sense, do not actually exist, paradoxical effectiveness emerges. The awakened merchant prepares thoroughly, acts skillfully, then releases attachment to outcome. Success reveals nothing about his worth, for he has no stake in proving anything. Failure occasions no despair, for who is there to be devastated? Outcomes arise from forces far vaster than personal will circumstances. Timing, countless variables beyond any individual's control. Recognizing this does not make him passive but free. This is what athletes call being in the zone action without actor, performance without performer, doing without doer. Most experience this state only in rare peak moments, but when ego dissolves through recognition rather than temporary circumstance, this flow becomes your constant mode, accessible not merely in special moments, but in ordinary tasks. Writing letters, negotiating contracts, preparing meals. Practice this today. Choose any recurring task. Invest fully in doing it well, but remain indifferent to results. If you succeed, notice the success without identifying with it, without taking credit, without inflation. If you fail, notice the failure without personal devastation, without self-recrimination, without deflation. Each time ego rushes back, claiming credit or assigning blame, gently return to simple doing without doer. Initially, this requires constant vigilance. The ego is not easily denied, but the habit forms gradually through repetition, until outcome independence becomes your natural state. Work becomes lighter, almost playful, yet no less skillful or serious. If recognition transforms work, it revolutionizes love even more profoundly. Romantic love, you must understand, is the will to live's cleverest trap, a temporary intoxication designed by nature to produce the next generation of sufferers. Yet recognizing this need not lead to cynicism or isolation. True intimacy becomes possible only when you release the neurotic demands that poison ordinary relationships. A widowed woman once asked me how to love again after devastating loss. I told her, love your first husband by recognizing he was merely temporary manifestation of the eternal will, as are you. The particular wave has returned to the ocean. The ocean itself continues. Love the next man the same way, fully present to this manifestation while it lasts, yet holding lightly, knowing impermanence is not defect but nature. Years later she thanked me. I love more deeply now, yet suffer less. The paradox is inexplicable to those who have not experienced it. Sexual attraction feels intensely personal. I desire you specifically, this particular individual among all possible others. Actually, the will to live seeks merely to create new bodies through which to manifest. Your conscious reasons for attraction are rationalizations constructed after the fact to justify the will's blind procreative drive. Understanding this does not eliminate desire, but removes the illusion that it means what you think it means. All relationships are temporary, ending in death, if not before. Accept this impermanence from the start. You need not protect yourself from inevitable loss through emotional withdrawal. Instead, love fully now, recognizing that now is all there ever is. The beloved is not yours to own, but another manifestation of the same will animating you. Love them as you might love a magnificent sunset, with full appreciation, yet without grasping. When they change or leave, you experience loss, but not betrayal. Grief, but not devastation. In your current relationships, notice when possessiveness arises, the urge to control, jealousy when attention turns elsewhere, demands for certain behaviors. These are ego's attempts to secure itself through another person. Consciously release the demand while maintaining the connection. This feels risky, like losing control. Actually, you are releasing an illusion of control you never possessed. Relationships deepen when demands dissolve. Paradoxically, less possessiveness enables greater intimacy. Death terrifies you only because you identify with the empirical self. Once you recognize yourself as temporary manifestation of eternal will, death becomes merely the wave returning to ocean, particular form dissolving while underlying reality continues unchanged. During Berlin's cholera epidemic of 1831, I observed two types of dying. Some clung desperately to their separate existence, thrashing in terror to the end. But a rare few seemed to dissolve peacefully back into the whole from which they came. The difference was not courage, but recognition, seeing through the illusion that makes death appear as personal catastrophe. Before you were conceived, where were you? Everywhere and nowhere you were the eternal will manifesting through infinite other forms. After this body's death, you return to this ubiquity. What is there to fear? The personality that fears did not exist before birth and will not exist after death. It is the temporary that fears cessation. The eternal cannot die. Consider, you die and are reborn nightly in sleep. Each morning you reconstruct yourself from memory. Physical death is merely this process. Continuing the reconstruction never resumes. If you survive, sleep undamaged, death poses no metaphysical threat. When death anxiety arises, yours or another's, trace it to its root. Identification with empirical self. Recognize that what dies was always temporary, while what you truly are is eternal. This is not comforting belief, but observable truth. This same recognition births compassion. When boundaries between self and other are seen as illusory, harming another becomes as irrational as your right hand striking your left. The beggar you passed on Frankfurt Street this morning, that is you. The horse being beaten by its driver, that is you. The apparent separation is phenomenal only. At the noumenal level, we are one. Give aid not from moral superiority, but from literal recognition of shared identity. The ethical question, why should I help, dissolves. You help for the same reason you feed yourself when hungry. The boundary between self and other is arbitrary, maintained only within representation. This is true morality, not external commandment requiring effort, but natural expression of metaphysical recognition. Compassion ceases being virtue and becomes simply seeing clearly. Those who grasp this cannot help but act ethically, not from duty but from understanding. Those who do not grasp it cannot achieve genuine virtue through any amount of moral striving. Death loses its terror. Compassion arises naturally. Both transformations stem from the same recognition. You are not who you thought you were, and this truth liberates rather than diminishes you. I must now reveal something that will seem paradoxical. Suffering is not existence's flaw, but its only feature with genuine value. Pain alone possesses sufficient force to shatter the comfortable delusions, preventing truth-seeking. A prosperous merchant's son once sought my teaching. I asked about his suffering. He had none perfect health, loving family, promising future, every comfort. I told him frankly, return when life has broken you. Until then, you lack the necessary motivation for genuine philosophy. This was not cruelty, but honesty. 20 years later, after business failure and personal tragedy, he returned. Now he could hear. Suffering had opened ears that prosperity had sealed shut. Why does wisdom rarely emerge in youth? Because the young, full of vitality and still enchanted by the will's promises, see no reason to question existence's fundamental structure. Life has not yet betrayed them repeatedly. They still believe satisfaction is achievable, that their projects will succeed, that romantic love will last, that achievement will bring fulfillment. Only when the will has demonstrated through bitter experience that every promise is false, every satisfaction temporary, every achievement hollow, only then does motivation arise to look behind the curtain. Survey history's wise Buddha, the Christian mystics, the Hindu sages, the Stoic philosophers. Most endured significant suffering, not because suffering itself produces wisdom automatically, but because suffering shatters the comfortable illusions that prevent philosophical inquiry. The happy man remains asleep. The wise man has awakened through pain's alarm. Physical pain teaches body's vulnerability and impermanence. Emotional suffering reveals desire's inevitable frustration. Existential suffering confronts life's fundamental meaninglessness. Social suffering exposes human relationships' instability. Each type, properly understood, points toward the same truth. The will to live itself is the problem, not particular circumstances. Having awakened through suffering, you become paradoxically grateful for experiences you would not wish repeated. They were the purchase price for liberation from illusion, expensive but worth the cost. Without them, you would have remained asleep your entire life, dying without ever having truly awakened. When suffering arises now, and it will, continue arising, for embodied existence means suffering. Resist the impulse to merely escape or numb it. Ask instead, what is this teaching me? Physical pain reveals the body's temporality. Disappointed desires reveal satisfaction's impossibility. Betrayed relationships reveal their inherent instability. Each suffering, properly investigated, becomes portal to deeper understanding. Do not seek suffering deliberately. The ascetic who inflicts unnecessary pain has missed the point entirely. But do not waste the suffering that inevitably comes. It is existence's single advantage over non-existence, the alarm that can wake you from the dream. We arrive now at the ultimate question. Having achieved consciousness in human form, can the will turn against itself? Can it recognize its own nature and voluntarily cease willing? I tell you it can. This is existence's rarest and most complete liberation, not suicide, which remains caught in frustrated willing, but serene resignation, voluntary withdrawal of life affirmation itself. I read of a Hindu ascetic who sat in meditation for decades, having voluntarily relinquished all willing. He ate when food was given, but never sought it. He slept when tired, but initiated no projects. He desired nothing, feared nothing, affirmed nothing. The profound peace radiating from him disturbed worldly visitors because it revealed their own frantic activity as completely unnecessary. Existence itself as optional. Understand the distinction carefully. Suicide is not will's denial, but its violent affirmation. The person wants life, but on different terms, and destroys the body in frustrated rage when reality refuses to comply. True denial is tranquil recognition that willing itself, not particular circumstances, produces suffering. The ascetic continues living biologically, but without the inner yes to existence that drives ordinary people through their frantic rounds. There are 3 levels of response to existence. Most affirm the will blindly, pursuing desires without question, identifying completely with the willing subject. Some, having recognized will's nature, continue willing but with detachment. This is wisdom in the marketplace, what I have been teaching thus far. The rarest few voluntarily deny the will to live itself, not through violent rejection, but through serene withdrawal of affirmation. I do not recommend pursuing this path unless drawn irresistibly. Most should remain at the 2nd level, wise engagement with life, activity without attachment. But if you find yourself unable to affirm existence, even with detachment, if the will to live itself has become unbearable burden, voluntary simplification offers relief. The signs of authentic denial: cessation of voluntary projects, indifference to outcomes, absence of anxiety, freedom from desire, voluntary poverty, sexual abstinence, profound peace. These are not moral achievements, but natural expressions when the will voluntarily negates itself. Should you feel called to this path, begin with radical simplification. Reduce possessions, minimize desires, withdraw from unnecessary projects. The outward life simplifies as inner willing diminishes, but do not force this prematurely. Attempting asceticism while still caught in willing produces only hypocrisy and additional suffering. Wait until recognition is complete before attempting its expression. The journey culminates not in withdrawal from life, but in transformed engagement with it. Having recognized the empirical self as illusory, the will as blind striving, and the possibility of its denial, you return to the marketplace, but everything is changed. After decades of solitary study, I emerged to live in Frankfurt, not as hermit, but as engaged citizen. I dine at the Englischer Hof, attend theater, maintain correspondence, write these books. I walk the same streets as the sleeping masses, perform the same practical activities, yet I hold it all lightly, without the desperate investment that tortures those who believe themselves to be autonomous individuals, defending their precious selves against a threatening world. This is not special spiritual achievement available only to philosophical adepts. It is simply the natural expression of seeing clearly. When the fog lifts and you see what was always there, behavior changes naturally, not through moral effort, but through recognition. You function effectively in representation's world, pay bills, maintain relationships, fulfill responsibilities while recognizing representation's provisional nature. You honor phenomeno's reality at its level while seeing through to the will beneath. Both truths coexist without conflict. The awakened person is not otherworldly, but completely present, engaged fully, yet attached to nothing. Initially, recognition comes and goes, moments of clarity followed by ego's return, periods of freedom interrupted by old patterns reasserting themselves. This is natural. Do not expect permanent enlightenment where ego never returns. For most, the pattern is recognition, forgetting, recognition. Even this fluctuation represents tremendous progress compared to perpetual sleep. The practice then is simply this: remember, forget, remember again. Each morning upon waking, before the day's concerns flood in, pause. Remember, the you about to engage the day is temporary manifestation, not ultimate reality. Throughout the day, when caught in ego drama, defending yourself, grasping at outcomes, fearing loss, remember again. When someone insults you, remember there is no one to insult. When you achieve success, remember there is no one to receive credit. When death approaches, remember there is no one to die. This is not discrete practice with beginning and end, but life itself as practice. Each moment offers the same choice: identify with the empirical self and suffer, or is no graduation from this practice. It is not preparation for some future state, but the awakened life itself. Compassion flows automatically from unity recognition. Honesty emerges without effort when defending false self ceases. Generosity arises naturally when boundaries are seen as arbitrary. Virtue is no longer effortful morality, but spontaneous expression of truth. Life continues with its joys and sorrows, successes and failures, but the weight is gone. You dance through existence rather than trudging through it, not because circumstances improved, but because you stopped identifying with the dancer. You are not a different person now, but the same person seeing clearly. The world has not changed. Your relationship to it has transformed completely. This is your real life beginning. Not some future state to achieve, but recognition of what always was. The sleep is lifted. The dream is seen as dream. What remains is simply this: existence continuing, but now transparent to the will that animates all things, including what you mistakenly called yourself. Welcome to your actual life. It has been waiting for you all along.